Right, Sarah, what is your fifth and final tip, please?
So it's actually quite a nice segue, actually, what you just asked into my final one, which is something that I just recently wrote about, and it's something that I think I'm more and more becoming quite impassioned about, because I think it is super fundamental, and it is a tip to leaders, this one, to ignite CPD culture. Like I said, I have been a teacher who thought that CPDs were a waste of time, and that's probably because the ones I was going to were. I have been part of being entirely critical of CPD. But I think that if you can get it right, and if you can explore exactly how to ignite CPD culture within your school, you will fundamentally have better staff retention. We're looking at all of these numbers, and I thought it was really crucial to bring up with you today, because all of these numbers and graphs that are coming out recently about teacher retention and, not being able to hold young teachers down, and how actually schools are still doing CPD, ineffectually. It's fundamentally that.
Oh, that's a good one. So I guess the obvious question is, how do we do this, Sarah? Because you're right, I visit lots of different schools and see lots of different approaches to CPD. What's been your takeaway? What are some of the good things that schools can do?
Yes, so I think the reason this is at my forefront is because I was just recently at the Festival of Education, and I was with quite an amazing few leaders and educators who I honestly just walked away and I was like, I love teaching, I love education. I walked away again just completely buzzing just to talk to people. But I think, fundamentally where schools go wrong, and it's drawing on, I use the term here, ignite CPD culture, is because I'm drawing back to sort of David Weston here about a sort of campfire leadership idea. But it is to have clear targets for a school. When we know that educational research takes time and needs to be measured. So if you're a school, it's sort of hard to see that you're going to an effective CPD session when every other week it's a different topic and there's no follow-up and you're not integrating anything. So actually, if you start from, right, what is our school culture? Who are we? What do we need? And you say, right, we're going to implement a year, 2 years, 3 years. And it is that longer term sort of slow burn ignition approach. Right, we've got these 3 targets. We need to measure before, we need to see what's going on before, and we need to discuss before with all staff, of course, because then you see, right, there is a purpose to this. We're evaluating, as businesses would, or as other places would, we're evaluating this area of our school, whatever it is, lower achieving boys, whatever it is. And then we're going to have a couple of CPDs along the course of the year to provide our knowledge, as well as feedback from departments as to how it's going, how it's being implemented. And again, you could do this initially as a sort of opt-in approach. It doesn't need to be every single staff sitting down all the time. You could say, right, we're going to have a core group who are sort of fundamentally in charge of feeding back this. Obviously, all staff will go to the CPDs, but we have a core group throughout the year feeding back to SLT, talking to other departments, talking together, and then we can present and discuss and reevaluate at the end and talk to staff about how they're going. So I think that's the thing. I think schools, sometimes, and I've definitely seen it where you've got like a CPD schedule at the beginning of the year, and it's sort of like November 3rd TBC, and it's like, well, what's the point of something that is to be confirmed if we're going to look at this as being an opportunity to learn and to really engage with what's happening within our school? It does probably need to have a bit of planning behind it in the first instance, and not just be something that we are tacking on at the end of the school day.
Yeah, this is another biggie. So just a few thoughts from me on this one. So I'm very fortunate. I get to visit lots of schools, and I'm obsessed with how they deliver CPD, because often I come in as kind of a bit of an external speaker, and one of my questions is always, what's going to happen after this? Like after I go home or whatever, like I try and wherever possible say, can I come 3 days over the course of the year as opposed to 1? But if that's not possible, what's the plan once I go away? What's the plan after this CPD? And even if you have an internal CPD, if it's just a one-off, like, how do you know? It's like the world's worst lesson, right? You know, you teach a lesson, you think you've nailed it, unless you revisit that, and you've no way of knowing whatsoever. So, yeah, one-off CPD is really problematic.
That's a great analogy, actually.
Really problematic.
Yeah, it's a great analogy.
The other thing that's problematic is, I saw this the other day in a school. So their CPD for the year that they were aiming to box off within 12 months, they wanted to sort out checking for understanding, retrieval. They wanted to do responsive teaching and cognitive load theory chucked into the mix. And I'm thinking that's a decade's worth of stuff to try and get your head around that.
Yeah.
And that feeds into the one-off thing, right? We'll have our retrieval CPD, then we'll have our check for understanding CPD, and it's just a disaster way of talking about. But my final thing is, I'm interested in your take on this. I'll tell you what I think is really effective, but it's quite hard to do. But if you can, I think it's brilliant. And that's where you have CPD, you know, have it on whatever, you know, check for understanding, whatever it may be. And then before people meet up again, you have some way of assessing how they're kind of responding to it. So whether it's drop into lessons, whether they record things, whatever it is. And then the start of the next session, as opposed to it being a general, okay, what's worked and what hasn't, whoever's running the CPD can almost do like examples and non-examples. Because just like you would do with a lesson, there's going to, like, just like we know there's a difference between what we teach kids and what they actually understand. It's the same with CPD, right? So if you can go around in the interim and you've seen an example of this, but you've also seen a really interesting non-example, somebody who thinks they're doing retrieval practice, but actually it's not quite doing it for whatever reason, it's not quite what we talked about and so on. Having those exemplars, I think, is so useful. But I don't know about you, I very rarely see it with CPD. It tends to be almost, right, we'll start from scratch when we do the kind of second session. I don't know what your take is on that.
Yeah, no, I would completely agree, and I think that's everything that, you know, sort of leadership does need to look at. Again, where you do see yourself in situations where you have worked with inspirational leaders who are getting this right, then you know it, you feel it within the culture. And I think it does need to be that sort of follow-up discussion. Here's where it's going well. This is where, you know, take from this, like, how can you try this in your department? Does it work? If it doesn't work, why doesn't it work? What's the difference? What's the shift there? You know, and really just opening up those conversations about what we're doing on the practice side of our profession, as well as the sort of general subject knowledge and stuff. And of course, a great CPD, a great CPD target, of course, is to enable your staff time to develop their subject knowledge, because subject knowledge is key. To be like, you know what, I want everyone to just be a bit more reignited in their subject knowledge. Let's see that happen. And that's, again, another great practice target to have on a CPD. But you're right, they need to be much more focused. And then again, that constant discussion and evaluation, because otherwise it is pointless. There's just like that. It might be, maybe you have a CPD where you get another little practice for your toolbox of teaching, and that's okay too. But when you're looking at schools saying, you know, we want to change these things, it can't just be the one-off. Like another really good example is, you know, I was talking to a friend who was at a school where they're like, right, we're going to put on these like after-school CPDs that are about well-being and teacher well-being so that you can be better by the end of the year. And I was like, well, have they actually captured how teachers are feeling about their well-being? And then will they do that at the end? And even so, they will have to differentiate between the fact that the well-being hasn't been just that we all got a pay rise the day before we gave you the final well-being essay. You know, it's that you fundamentally believe that having these 6 sessions after school across the course of this year really contributed to your general sense of well-being. And if it didn't, is there a point to it?
That's brilliant. That's absolutely brilliant. Well, Sarah, we've done 5 biggies here, right? There's no messing around with these.
I know. I'm so sorry. I was like, I could have done little. I was thinking about it. I could do little teacher things, but these are the things that I love and that I'm really interested in. And I know they are a bit bigger philosophically, but I think they do oversee quite a lot that we're talking about on the day-to-day.
No, this is absolutely brilliant. We have the big five like this, and then we'll have another guest who'll say, remember to put your lids on your mini whiteboard pens. So we have everything on this show. So this is absolutely perfect. So now it's time for me to hand over to you, Sarah. What should listeners check out of yours? And I'll put links to these in the show notes.
Yeah, so I've got a blog. It's perspected.wordpress. So I regularly write on that. I've written quite a few chapters for various people, but I also have my research ed assessment book as well. So that's me personally, but I have given a list of various other readings, which are things that I think are really important: education endowment, foundation, evaluations on feedback and of the dialogic classroom, Robin McPherson's A Teaching Life, which I wrote about recently, which is on CPD culture. So everything I've sort of talked about today, you will put those references up. I'm not going to, some Dylan Williams stuff. So everything that sort of underpins, the research that underpins the things that I've spoken about, I've passed on a list for you, which I'm sure you will put up.
That's brilliant. Yep, that'll all be in the show notes. Well.